For Prima Media's Polity, Tabi Madiba, South African Institute of International Affairs, Senior Researcher China Africa Cobus van Staden, joins me to discuss his co-edited book titled Anxious Joburg, The Inner Lives of a Global South City. Anxious Joburg details the lives of global South City. So can you talk to us about the motivation behind this book?
The reason why we focused on global South cities and Joburg in particular is that a lot of how we think about what city life means is really shaped by the media of the global north. You know, so if you think about, for example, the role that New York plays in a series like Sex and the City, it's always like New York. It's a character just like the Four Friends. You know, in the first place, our ideas of what it means to live in a city is shaped by this very small handful of global north cities: Paris, London, New York. And at the same time, when we look at global south cities, it's almost always viewed from the perspective of the global north. So it's about, oh, these cities, they're so polluted, there's so many migrants leaving them, there's all of these problems. So, you know, you never get a perspective of what city life is like from the perspective of the global south. City life is always defined from the perspective of the global north. And when people talk about city life in the global south, it's almost always defined as a problem. So this is, you know, so we were interested in unpacking what the experience of living in the global south is like, and, you know, and to put the thinking about cities themselves in the frame of the global south.
And briefly talk to us about the process of selecting the essays to construct this book, and were there any challenges faced with regards to editing?
Our main approach was to cast the net as wide as possible. You know, we're academics, so Nikki and I, that work started at an academic workshop with academic contributors, but we didn't only want academic contributors. We wanted as wide a net as possible, and so we tried to invite many different people coming from many academic disciplines, but also from many other disciplines. You know, so including photography, by Letsi Tatsi's you know, kind of like reflections on being a woman riding taxis in Joburg. We pulled in those contributions in order to show, you know, the width of the experience. One of the problems with doing this kind of work in South Africa is that South African academia is not nearly representative enough of the population. You know, we don't have enough academics of color, we don't have enough women academics and non-binary academics, but so we really try to kind of pull in as many of those people as possible. And I think, you know, kind of we're very grateful for all of those contributors who helped to make the book more representative.
And why do you say the experience of being anxious in global South cities receives much less attention?
It's, you know, so frequently the kind of media power of the world still frequently sits in the global north. There's the issue of language. There isn't necessarily a shared language that can connect people in India and people in Brazil and people in you know, in Lagos, for example. But, you know, there is, however, some tools that we can use, and we use that to try and kind of unpack exactly the specificities of the experience of being in the global south, in order to then open up a conversation with other global south cities. You know, we're not trying to pretend that Joburg is special or unique. You know, like being in Lagos, for example, has its own set of complicated anxieties. But at least, you know, in being clear about what the situation is in Joburg, we can then start to open a conversation with other global south cities too.
And one of their contributors, Derek Wook, examines the ongoing racialization. So briefly discuss the multidimensionality of white anxiety and how the notion of anxiety might alert to the possibilities of change, at least in the clinical domain.
You know, one of the issues with Joburg particularly is that so much of the anxieties expressed about life in Joburg has to do with crime, right? Kind of so Johannesburg has an actual crime problem. You know, obviously, like particularly violent crime is a really big problem in Johannesburg. But we also have to keep in mind that when when people in South Africa talk about crime, they frequently talk about other things as well. You know, crime talk covers a lot of different issues and kind of smuggles in a bunch of different issues, not least of which is racial anxiety. You know, so you know, when white people talk about crime or complain about crime, it takes on an extra set of meanings. And so in several of these essays, we unpack different aspects of it, and Derek's work is you know, kind of goes at it head on. And you know, so what we wanted to show is that the issues around crime, you know, even though the people who are most vocal about their anxieties about crime tend to be middle class people and then frequently white people, but the people who suffer the most under crime proportionally in the population are poor black people. That is something we unpack, for example, in some of Aidan Mosselson's work in this book. Is we're looking at you know, we're trying to balance the kind of political implications of white complaints about crime with the realities of the kind of like anxieties around crime that are faced by the entire population of the country. So we're not trying to devalue white people's kind of complaints, but we are trying to contextualize them and unpack them and to show that crime in South Africa, and particularly crime in Johannesburg, is a very complicated issue that needs to be seen from all of these different perspectives at once.
Mm-hmm. And as you just mentioned, Aidan, Mosselsson says anxieties about crime and violence are constructive parts of lower income residents' experience of the inner city. So what do you think are the contributing factors to this?
Well, you know, it feeds into both the legacies of apartheid and governance failures, you know, kind of the post-apartheid era, and you know, kind of the wider issues around development. You know, so there's a lot of issues that feed into that. Whether gender works, you know, kind of in South Africa has a direct link to crime. So it's, you know, crime is one of these kind of massive problems that keep kind of popping up in different guises, you know, depending on the different situation. And what we try to do is look less at crime as a problem itself and more of what anxieties about crime reveals about the wider experience of being in the city. And one of the things that it reveals, I think, is that everyone in Johannesburg is anxious about crime, but they're anxious about crime in very different ways. And I think that is really key to addressing the crime problem, is to really show that it is a problem, but that it's a problem that shows up differently for different people. And it can't just simply be, you know, kind of taking, for example, the Democratic Alliance's line on crime as the final word. You know, kind of like one has to keep honing in on the ways that crime affect different people in the city.
And you also wrote an essay on the anxieties about crime and safety. You said they are completely bound up with aspiration. So can you please summarize the violence aimed at Black, female, and queer fans at the Global Citizen concert?
You know, one of the issues, one of the complications of crime is that when something is labeled as crime, it then, or you know, it then strips away some of the other kind of implications of the same situation, right? So, and I think the Global Citizen, you know, situation where, you know, there was this massive Beyonce concert, and then, you know, after the concert, there was suddenly this kind of, you know, kind of like complete breakdown in law enforcement, and a whole lot of people got kind of affected by violence. Some of the people who were like most affected were women and queer people. And the Beyonce concert itself was this moment, this kind of joyful moment where they could be visible in the public space, you know. So we know that women face a lot of problems for kind of for dressing in particular ways, you know, kind of like, you know, there's been a lot of controversies about, you know, women being hassled for wearing short skirts. And that was a moment where the discussion of the problems that came after the Global Citizen concert was completely framed in terms of crime, as a crime problem. And it was indeed a crime problem, but at the same time also was a kind of a way for women and queer people to be kind of put under control, kind of. So after they had the moment to kind of to express themselves fully in the public space then crack down on that expression, and that's one of the ways, one of the things that we lose. That we can't, it's very difficult to discuss the gendered aspect of that when the entire framing is around the crime aspect of it.
And lastly, do you hope South Africans will be more open to talking about their anxieties after reading this book?
I really hope so. This is one of the things that we're aiming at. We're trying to make it as accessible as possible. We're trying to give lots of kind of ways into the discussion, and we really hope that that this will spark discussion, because like people in Joburg are anxious, but people in South Africa are anxious as a whole, so I think it's really important for the rest of the country to also talk about how they're feeling, because it's really something that everyone is suffering from, and like we're a traumatized country, and in order to kind of move forward, we need to talk about the specifics of how we're feeling. So we're hoping this is like a very small gesture, first kind of step in that direction.
That was Cobus van Staden speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about anxious Joburg, the inner lives of a global South city.